Well, it's finally here. The LUMIX S1H has properly been announced, because we had that little teaser announcement a few months back that just drip fed us some of the features that we wanted to hear about with this camera. Now we've got the full set, and of course I've had the pleasure of shooting with it for 3 to 4 days just to get a general feel for what it's about. So in this video I'm going to show you a lot of the footage that I've captured. Bear in mind that this is a pre-production model though, with pre-production firmware, so it might not all be there, but hopefully enough to give you a general sense as to what it can do. And of course I'll explain to you all the headline features, all the specs, the things that stand out, the things that you'll want to know with this camera. So let's kick things off with a look at the body. Okay, so first things first, of course the S1H shares the same L mount that the S1 and the S1R has. However, you'll notice that the body has been slightly beefed up. There are now air vents on the side to deal with the heat generated from some of the impressive recording spec this camera is capable of. More on that later. And before you judge, even though this camera clearly has a fan and open vents, it is still weather sealed with the same hardiness that the S1 and S1R have. There's also a new variable angle flip out screen, which is going to make framing those awkward high, low and side shots so much easier. A nice touch is also that it pulls out slightly, so if you've got a HDMI cable connected to the camera, the screen doesn't constantly nudge it and hit it when you turn it around. And talking of HDMI, that full-size HDMI port can now also down convert the signal coming out of the camera, something that you couldn't do on the other S models. On the top of the camera, we've also got a new 1.8-inch screen that displays all the settings you need to see as a filmmaker when you're operating the camera. Unlike the S1 and S1R, the S1H adopts 2 SD card slots, both of which are UHS 2 rated. You can record simultaneously to both cards for an instant backup, or you can even hot swap them without ever having to stop the recording. And much like the GH5S, the S1H comes with a BNC adapter cable so that you can utilise timecode through that flash sync port. Perfect for those multi-camera projects or when you're working with a soundy. Finally, there is a tally light on the front and the back of the camera when a record is triggered locally or when using an external recorder. Okay, so let's talk about the recording capabilities of this camera, because of course that's where it really does impress. Now, at its heart is a 24.2 megapixel full frame sensor. It's actually the same sensor that's found in the LUMIX S1, however the information of that sensor is handled rather differently. Now I just want to make it clear at this point in the video that I'm not really going to touch upon the stills capabilities of this camera for 2 reasons really. One, I don't really think you're going to be buying this camera for stills predominantly, because let's face it, this is the video orientated version of the 3 cameras in the S lineup. And 2, if you are, then it has pretty much identical feature set, performance, capabilities of the LUMIX S1. So if you've used the S1 for photography, you're going to get very much the same with the S1H. And if you haven't, or you don't know much about the S1, then just click on the link in the corner of the screen now and you can see our overview video of that camera. Before I move on to the video formats, I just want to point out that this camera does have a dual native ISO. And when you're filming in Vlog, and that's full Vlog by the way, that's included with the camera, those 2 native ISOs are 640 and 4000, which isn't that far off from the dual native ISO range of the VariCam LT, which is a 10 grand purebred filmmaking camera. Having the 2 native ISOs ultimately means that you're going to be able to capture cleaner shots when shooting at higher ISOs due to having that second analog circuit at 4000 ISO to switch to. And if you compare the noise in the trees in the top left of the frame, you can see the difference. The S1H can also resolve the same amount of dynamic range as the VariCam LT at a very impressive 14 plus stops of dynamic range. This is fantastic for a camera, not only for this class, but for any dedicated cine camera. The headline spec is that this camera can record up to 6K video. Now that is 6K up to 24 frames a second when using the full sensor in a 3:2 aspect ratio. So really it's mainly going to be used for when you're going out shooting with anamorphic glass, or you want to crop in on a 16:9 image in post and have some flexibility in reframing. And you can see here the difference. If you drop slightly to 5.9K, then you can shoot up to 24 frames a second, but using a 16:9 aspect ratio. All of these 6K, 5.9K recording formats are all in 10-bit 420 at a bitrate of 200 megabits per second longer. A shout out to Mick Kirkby-Geddes, he's the guy you're seeing right now on screen. He's a metal worker who's based near the Peak District and he makes some amazing work just out of scrap metal. I'll be putting together a separate video in the near future that just focuses on him, and of course still showing you lots of footage coming out of this camera. Once it's live, I'll put a link in the description. Now, one of the attractive things about this camera is that it has plenty of options for shooting with anamorphic glass. Now, it has a built-in de-squeeze function that can de-squeeze that image whilst you're previewing your image live, whilst you're shooting, and also upon playback. And it can de-squeeze from 1.3, 1.33, 1.5, 1.8, and 2 times anamorphic, so plenty of options there. Now, I was shooting with the Blackmagic Anamorphic Cine lens, which is a 1.33 times stretch, let's say. And that is PL mount, and to use that lens on here I was using a little adapter by Kipon, adapter from PL to L mount, and I was shooting handheld on a mirrorless camera body with that Cine anamorphic lens, which is something I've never done before. And I think that's what's really exciting about this camera. Because of its form factor, you're actually able to shoot with anamorphic glass handheld, and it's not too much of a pain. You know, that image is stabilized. You know, it can record up to 6K. It can record in 10-bit. I think that's why I've never really shot with anamorphic glass before, because typically, you know, they're quite expensive, so you're normally going to rent that sort of glass. And when you're renting it and putting it on a mirrorless camera body that's got rather compressed codecs, it seems like you're not being able to, you know, make the most of that image when you get into post, and it doesn't really tally up to me. But with this camera, like I said, because you can record in quite high resolutions, you can record in 10-bit, you know, and it's got a full frame look and it's stabilized, and now it becomes something that's more feasible to actually rent, you know, that anamorphic glass to put on a camera like this. Of course, you've got plenty of 4K recording options with this camera. It's not all about 6K. You know, it's great to have 6K, but I'm probably not going to be delivering many of my projects in 6K. What I'm attracted to is shooting in 6K and delivering in 4K, because that's going to give me some flexibility in post then. You know, I can slightly reframe some of my shots, digi-dolly, digi-zoom. I can add some stabilization without losing any resolution in my 4K timeline too. And also, if you're shooting in low light scenarios, then that noise pattern in the 6K, when it's downsampled to 4K, it's going to be less noticeable. It's going to give you a cleaner image. So it's great to have that flexibility. And just to give you an idea as to the difference in size, I'll bring up on screen now, this is the 6K shot. And then next to it, we've got a 4K crop in, so you can see what that crop in 4K would be. And then we've got a HD crop in as well. So if you're delivering your project in HD, then this is how much you can crop in without losing any resolution. So it gives you so much flexibility when you get into your edit. Much like the S1, the S1H can record all the normal speed 4K formats in 10-bit 422 in both intra and long op options. Now for double speed, so 50 or 60 frames a second depending on the format you're shooting for, then this is now possible in 10-bit internally, but that is 10-bit 420, not 10-bit 422. So if you want that extra chroma information, you'll still need to use an external recorder. And much like the S1, there is still also a Super 35mm crop when filming at 4K at 48 frames a second and above. In terms of slow motion, you can of course shoot 4K up to 60 frames a second as I've just mentioned, but for a more exaggerated effect, the S1H can also shoot in HD at up to 180 frames per second with a Super 35mm crop, or 150 frames per second with no crop, and this is using the variable frame rate mode. And unlike the S1 and S1R, you do have manual control over your image. But here's the interesting part. If you use the high frame rate mode instead of the variable frame rate mode, which maxes out at 100 frames per second in HD, then continuous autofocus, including tracking, will work, along with sound recording. This is a huge plus. Now I think it goes without saying, due to the caliber of this camera, that it does have an unlimited record time. And because those SD cards are hot swappable, you can just keep recording and recording until either you run out of SD cards to put in there or you run out of power. Now it uses the same batteries that the S1 and the S1R use, and you roughly get about 2 hours of recording 4K, 6K per battery. That's what I've been getting anyway, because I've been switching between the two.
Now in my test shoots, I've shot a lot handheld with this camera. The sensor is stabilized, and coupled with an image stabilized lens such as a LUMIX 24-105 f4, you do get up to 6.5 stops of stabilization, which is fantastic. Having that stabilized sensor also allows me to shoot handheld with various bits of cine glass, prime lenses, using adapters and using non-native lenses, all while still being able to get smooth, non-jittery footage. The sensor alone will give you 6 stops of image stabilization, which is amazing. When the S1 was first announced, I think my main concern as a filmmaker was that there wasn't that many lens options for it. Of course, we are now further down the line and we have 3 camera bodies in the S lineup, and I don't feel like it's as much of an issue for me now. I've mainly been shooting with the LUMIX 24-70 f2.8. Of course, it's their newest lens. It's the lens that I've always wanted since the S1 was first announced, because this would be my normal workhorse of a lens. So that's been fantastic to use. I've also been using the 24-105 f4 and the 50mm f1.4, which is great for portraits or interviews. But I've also been using some new manual native primes from Kipon that, as you can see, are great for keeping the camera's footprint smaller. You know, that 50mm is a hell of a lot smaller than that LUMIX 50mm. And of course, don't forget, there is the Sigma MC21 adapter too, so using my older Canon glass, or any EF glass for that matter, isn't a problem. There are also some updates to the menu system on the S1H. There's a new filmmaking GUI that you can bring up on screen, something that replicates what you'd find on the VariCam lineup or even ARRI cameras that display all the main settings, which you can easily change on the fly just by tapping on the screen. Some other additions is that you can now set your shutter speed to shutter angle. We also have the addition of Synchro Scan 2, so you can make micro adjustments to that shutter angle or shutter speed. And we have a vector scope. Now, there are lots of different recording resolutions, codecs modes, aspect ratios in this camera. I think there's around about 85 of them. So a nice touch is that you can now filter through these different options to make selecting them on the fly that bit easier. And if you've not had a play with the S1 or the S1R for reference, then overall I think as a filmmaking package, all of these cameras have nearly all of the monitoring tools that I would want as a filmmaker included. Moving on to audio, one accessory I would definitely recommend using with the S1H is the LUMIX XLR adapter. It is the same one that works with the GH series and the S1 and S1R. When you use this XLR adapter, of course, it does give you more manual physical controls. You do get 2 professional XLR connections, and it does up the audio fidelity from 48 kHz in 16-bit to 96 kHz in 24-bit.
Overall, I think this camera packs a huge punch. You know, on paper, when we're talking about hybrid mirrorless cameras, I don't really know any other camera out there that comes anywhere near close to what this camera can do when we're talking about its filmmaking capabilities. And also, don't forget, you know, it's still a stills camera. It's the same performance as the LUMIX S1. So in terms of features and capabilities, you've got so much crammed into this rather small body. Now, if you're a new filmmaker or potentially a photographer who's branching over into video, then the £3,500 roughly price tag for the body only may seem quite steep. But if you are a filmmaker, then you know you're going to be used to the prices that we've had to pay for the Super 35mm big dedicated video cameras, cine cameras. And because that price difference, when you actually look at those cameras now, some of them that are still in circulation today, that are still very popular to use on sets, this actually has better spec in certain elements than some of those dedicated cine cameras. And of course, the price difference there is massive. So in that sense, I could easily see this being a good B or C camera on bigger budget productions, where the main camera could be something from the likes of ARRI or Red, or of course VariCam, with it being Panasonic, because it's going to be easier for gimbal work, it's going to be easier for shooting in tighter, smaller locations. Maybe as well, if you want to shoot handheld and keep it lightweight, because it's got the image stabilized sensor in there, that's going to be easier too. And of course, if you're shooting with anamorphic glass on your main camera, then this is going to be able to keep up. You know, it's going to be able to take the anamorphic lens, it's going to be able to shoot in 6K, and of course it can record in 10-bit, so you've got that data there to work with too. And if you're not going to work on those sort of productions with those sort of cameras, and this is still going to make a fantastic A camera if this is the sort of form factor that you like to work with. So yeah, I think it's hugely impressive. I've enjoyed my time shooting with it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, hit that like button or make my day and hit that subscribe button. That would be even better. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments, or if you just want to share your thoughts, put them there too, and we can just start the discussion, get it going. So thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time.